group of former top military lawyers just dropped a blistering statement making it painfully clear that Pete Hegsth's little fantasy camp orders to kill any survivors from the military strikes on those fishing vessels off the first and coast of Venezuela aren't tough guy patriotism. They're war crimes. Full stop. These former judge advocates, people who actually understand the laws of armed conflict instead of cosplay versions of it on cable news, say exactly that. That the former JAG working group, that's what they're called, unanimously considers both the giving and the execution of these orders, if true, to constitute war crimes, murder, or both. They put out what's called a statement of the former JAG's working group on media reports of Pentagon no-quarter orders in Caribbean boat strikes. This is what Pete Hegsth wrote in his 2024 book. The subject was, should we follow the Geneva Conventions? Should we follow the Geneva Conventions? Hegsth writes, what if we treated the enemy the way they treated us? Would that not be an incentive for the other side to reconsider their barbarism? Hey, Al-Qaeda, if you surrender, we might spare your life. If you do not, we will rip your arms off and feed them to hogs. Makes me wonder in 2024, if you want to win, how could anyone write universal rules about killing other people in open conflict, especially against enemies who fight like savages, disregarding human life in every single instance? Maybe instead we are just fighting with one hand behind our back and the enemy knows it. 29th November, 2025. Yesterday, the Washington Post and CNN reported that the Secretary of Defense personally issued orders to, quote, kill everybody aboard a civilian vessel suspected of narcotic trafficking. The attack on the 2nd of September 2025 that targeted a vessel carrying 11 civilians and allegedly an unknown quantity of drugs. The first strike resulted in near total destruction of the vessel. However, 2 survivors were apparently observed via surveillance video clinging to wreckage, whereupon the commander directing the operation ordered a second strike. The second strike killed both of the survivors. The former JAG's working group unanimously consider both the giving and the execution of these orders, if true, to constitute war crimes, murder, or both. Our group was established in February 2025. Inch's response to the Secretary of Defense's firing of the Army and Air Force Judge Advocates General and his systemic dismantling of the military's legal guardrails. Had those guardrails been in place, we are confident they would have prevented these crimes. If the U.S. military operation to interdict and destroy suspected narcotic trafficking vessels is a non-international armed conflict, as the Trump administration suggests, orders to kill everybody, which can reasonably be regarded as an order to give, quote, no quarter and to, quote, double tap a target in order to kill survivors, are clearly illegal under international law. In short, they are war crimes. If the U.S. military operation is not an armed conflict of any kind, these orders to kill helpless civilians clinging to the wreckage of a vessel our military destroyed would subject everybody from the Secretary of Defense down to the individual who pulled the trigger to prosecution under the U.S. law for murder. We call upon Congress to investigate and the American people to oppose any use of the U.S. military that involves the intentional targeting of anyone enemy combatants, non-combatants or civilians, rendered or de combat out of the fight as a result of their wounds or the destruction of the ship or aircraft carrying them. We also advise our fellow citizens that orders like those described above are the kinds of patently illegal orders all military members have a duty to disobey, since orders to kill survivors of an attack at sea are patently illegal. Anybody who issues or follows such orders can and should be prosecuted for war crimes, murder, or both. Then they go into a summary of what went down. Regardless of whether the U.S. is involved in an armed conflict, law enforcement operation, or any other application of military force, international and domestic U.S. law prohibit the intentional targeting of defenseless persons. If the Washington Post and CNN reports are true, the 2 survivors of the September 2nd, 2025 U.S. attack against the vessel carrying 11 persons were rendered unable to continue their mission when the U.S. military forces significantly damaged the vessel carrying them. Under such circumstances, not only does international law prohibit targeting these survivors, but it also requires the attacking force to protect, rescue, and if applicable, treat them as prisoners of war. Violations of these obligations are war crimes, murder, or both. There are no other options. An operational law, primer, applicable international humanitarian law. The United States has publicly described the Narat trafficking attacks as, quote, non-international armed conflict because our enemy is an international terrorist organization rather than a sovereign state. As such, the full scope of international law generally applicable to armed conflict does not necessarily apply to this conflict. Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions. The main body of IHL applicable to non-international armed conflicts is a subset of the Geneva Conventions that is applicable to all international armed conflicts. The relevant provision of CA3 states in relevant part in the case of armed conflict not of an international character occurring in the territory of one of the high contracting parties. Each party to the conflict shall be bound to apply as a minimum the following provisions. 1. Persons taking no active part in the hostilities, including members of armed forces who have laid down their arms and those placed or de combat by sickness, wounds, detention, or any other cause, shall in all circumstances be treated humanely without any adverse distinction founded on race, color, religion, or faith, sex, birth, or wealth, or any other similar criteria. To this end, the following acts are and shall remain prohibited at any time and in any place whatsoever with respect to the above-mentioned persons. A violence to life and persons in particular, murder of all kinds, mutilation, cruel treatment and torture, B. Taking of hostages, C. Outrages upon personal dignity, in particular humiliating and degrading treatment, D. The putting of sentences and the carrying out of executions without previous judgment pronounced by a regularly constituted court, affording all the judicial guarantees which are recognized as indispensable by civilized people. 2. The wounded and sick shall be collected and cared for. It should also be noted that wounded, sick, or shipwrecked persons and members of crews of the merchant marine and are considered protected persons under Articles 12 and 13, respectively, of the Second Geneva Convention. In essence, the Geneva Convention and other long-standing international maritime laws prohibits U.S. forces from doing anything to survivors of a military attack that destroys the vessel or aircraft carrying them other than rescuing them. They certainly prohibit U.S. forces from killing them when violations of IHL rising to the level of war crimes could be prosecuted by an international tribunal. Domestic U.S. Law 18 U.S.C. Section 24041 War Crimes subjects U.S. citizens to criminal prosecutions for war crimes. U.S. courts have jurisdictions over such offenses regardless of whether they are committed if the offender is a U.S. national or a member of the U.S. Armed Forces. And the crime constitutes inter alia a grave breach of Common Article 3, 197H Convention, even before the Geneva Convention of 1949. The laws were clearly prohibited. Orders that no quarter be given the H Convention. Section 4 Regulations Article 23 substates specifically that, quote, it is especially forbidden to declare that no quarter will be given orders to give, quote, no quarter or to kill everyone including survivors wounded, ill, or anyone else who is no longer able to carry out their military mission are not only unlawful orders, they subject those who give and execute such orders to prosecution as war criminals. The United States became a party to this treaty on the 27th of November, 1999. Its prohibition against no quarter orders has also become a principle of customary international law. Therefore, violations of this treaty and customary law are also violations of U.S. law pending IHL. Additional Protocol 2, the Art of the Geneva Convention. In 1977, the parties to the Geneva Convention, including the United States, drafted a new protocol to address the challenges of non-international armed conflicts to which no treaty-based IHL, with the exception of CA3, applies. Since to that point about 80% of all armed conflicts were of a non-international nature, the parties drafted this protocol to fill in that legal void. The Protocol AP2 simply extends the principles enshrined in the original for Geneva Convention to conflicts of a non-international nature. One relevant provision in AP2 is Article 7, which states all wounded and shipwrecked, whether or not they have taken part in the armed conflict, shall be respected and protected. This makes the second strike with survivors in the water particularly heinous. We characterize AP2 as, quote, pending, because although the United States signed the treaty on the 12th of December, 977, the Senate has not yet provided its, quote, advice and consent, despite having received it for the purpose from President Ronald Reagan in 1987. Perhaps now is the time to remedy that. Notwithstanding the fact that AP2 has not yet achieved status in U.S. law, the United States has for many years adhered to the principle that, quote, U.S. military practice is already consistent with additional protocols, its provisions subject to certain proposed reservations, understanding, and declarations. Furthermore, the United States has stated that, quote, as a matter of policy, it routinely imposes heightened standards and its forces that are more protective of civilians than required under international humanitarian laws. We believe that under all these circumstances, particularly the gross violations of international law reported yesterday, the Senate must immediately take up the matter of AP2 advice and consent. Applicable U.S. law giving and executing no court order subjects individuals to either U.S. criminal statutes or the Uniform Code of Military Justice. 18. U.S.C. Shakes 1111. Murder. Murder is the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. Civilian personnel who issue and execute orders to kill any human being can be prosecuted for murder unless a defense applies. The Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunals establishes as a matter of customary international law that these superior orders are no defense to war crimes. In other words, everybody in the chain of command is responsible. 18 U.S.C. Section 2441 War Crimes. See discussion of Common Article 3 above UCMJ Article 118 Murder, substantively similar to the federal murder statute applicable to civilians. UCMJ Article 118 provides that anyone who unlawfully kills a human being is guilty of murder. A great deal has been written lately about the notion that superior orders may provide a defense to certain military offenses. Military law does provide a superior orders defense. It is a defense to any offense that the accused was acting pursuant to orders unless the accused knew the orders to be unlawful, or a person of ordinary sense and understanding would have known the orders to be unlawful. That's Rules of Court Martial Section 9116D. Another part of the manual for courts martial puts it in a slightly different but equally compelling way. An order requiring the performance of a military duty or act may be inferred to be lawful, and it is disobeyed at the peril of the subordinate. The inference does not apply to patently illegal orders, such as ones that direct the commission of a crime. Again, the bottom line is that since orders to kill survivors of an attack at sea are patently illegal, anyone who issues or follows such orders can and should be prosecuted for war crimes, murder, or both. Now, I want to be clear, the people who make up this working group formed back in February 2025 aren't random commentators or Twitter tough guys. These are some of the most respected former military lawyers in the country. You've got retired Major General Stephen Lepper, who served as the Deputy Judge Advocate General for the U.S. Air Force. You've got Patrick Milan, a retired Marine Corps judge and former federal prosecutor who's already spoken publicly about the group's position. There's Rob Butch Bracknell, a former Marine and military lawyer who has provided expert commentary for years. And Todd Huntley, a retired Navy captain, JAG officer, and now director of Georgetown's National Security Law Program. Yes, my law school. By the way, it should also be noted that Ann Bauer and others who have been digging through Pete Hegsth's prior writings say the following. This is what Pete H. Gith wrote in his 2024 book. The subject was, should we follow the Geneva Conventions? Should we follow the Geneva Conventions? A. Gith writes, what if we treated the enemy the way they treated us? Would that not be an incentive for the other side to reconsider their barbarism? Hey, Al-Qaeda, if you surrender, we might spare your life. If you do not, we will rip your arms off and feed them to hogs. Makes me wonder, in 2024, if you want to win, how could anyone write universal rules about killing other people in open conflict, especially against enemies who fight like savages, disregarding human life in every single instance? Maybe instead, we are just fighting with one hand behind our back and the enemy knows it. No, Mr. Hegseth. No, Mr. Hegseth. We are supposed to fight the way actual civilized nations fight by aligning our conduct with the Geneva Conventions. America isn't supposed to mirror the barbarism you project onto others. America is supposed to set the standard for how the world behaves, because when there's no law, no boundaries, No order, everything collapses. And under the Trump regime, we're watching exactly that collapse in real time. That letter I just showed you, that statement I just read, wasn't written by partisans or pundits. It was drafted by former top military lawyers who said plainly and unmistakably that the conduct by Hecht and everyone up the chain of command constitutes war crimes. Full stop. And we are going to continue covering every inch of it on this show. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video. If you stuck around to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. Keep on fighting, y'all. Don't let them silence you. And until next time, I'll see you.